We all know that bees are very important for gardens around the world, but bees are among the most misunderstood of the beneficial insects that we'd like to have in our garden. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I believe that a good book can offer an abundance of knowledge that we gardeners should have. So join me as I discuss one of the best gardening books, The Bees in Your Backyard by Joseph S. Wilson and Olivia Messinger Carril. The Bees in Your Backyard is a guide to North America's bees. Did you know that there are about 20,000 different bee species around the world? And based on the numbers that are discovered every year, scientists actually estimate that number may be closer to 30,000 worldwide bee species. And of those, we have more than 4,000 different bee species in the United States and Canada. And this book discusses all of those. 4,000 bee species? That's 6 times the number of species of butterflies. That's 10 times the number of species of mammals in the United States and Canada. I think this is a very important book because bees are so often misunderstood and we know so little about them. And as is stated in the book, with understanding comes appreciation. And if we can learn to appreciate our bees, I think we'll all be better off. We're most familiar with the honeybee or the bumblebee. But did you know that bumblebees and honeybees only make up about 1% of all the bee species in the United States and Canada? Bees go well beyond the yellow and the black that we're familiar with. They come in virtually all colors. Some can be quite iridescent and beautiful. The size of the bee varies greatly throughout North America. The smallest bee is only about 0.1 inches. The biggest bee is well over an inch in size. When we picture bees, we often think of a hive with a swarm of bees, but that couldn't be further from the way it actually is. Almost all bees are solitary bees. That means the female finds the location for a nest and then builds the nest, gathers food to put in that nest for emerging young, then lays eggs, seals the nest, and dies without ever being social. Did you know that bees have trouble perceiving the color red? And so flowers that depend on bee pollination are very seldom red. Bees prefer purple and yellow and orange. Honeybees are the only kind of bees that will leave their stinger behind when they sting. That's because they're the only bees that have a barb on their stinger, and therefore when they sting, they die. But all other bees don't have barbs, and they can actually sting you multiple times. But don't be worried, because they only do that in defense. They'd rather fly away than sting. Bees are the only organism that collect pollen. Other insects and animals might eat the pollen, but bees are the only ones that collect it for later use. The Bees in Your Backyard is a reference book, though I have to admit I read it cover to cover because I was enthralled by the amazing pictures and the amount of information that was in this book. I recommend it as a reference book, but for just pure enjoyment, to learn something about something as important as a bee, is really a good reason to have this book. Here's another misunderstanding that almost all of us are guilty of. Only honeybees make honey. They're the only bee that does that. One of the best things about the bees in your backyard is the extensive section it has on identifying bees. There are flies that look like bees and wasps that look like bees, but bees themselves have some very specific characteristics. And you can look at the insect on the flower and determine if it's a fly or a bee or a wasp by following the guidelines in this book. I like growing salvia in my garden, and one of the plants in my front yard has attracted as many as 5 different types of bees. And here you can find suggestions for many other types of flowers to attract bees, including the color of the bloom and the time of year that you can expect them to bloom. The Bees in Your Backyard is great at explaining habitats, where bees live, and how they live in those various areas. It's broken down by different regions of the United States and Canada, so you can see your region, see what kind of bees live in your area, and maybe get an idea of the best habitats for those bees. If you'd like to provide habitats for bees, well, there's a section to tell you just exactly how to do that and to make your garden inviting to bees. Many people are afraid of bees because they're afraid of getting stung, but that's really a misguided fear. They'll only sting if they're threatened. They have much more interest in the flower than they do in you. Did you know that the bee's stinger was originally the way the female bees laid eggs? It's an ovipositor, but over the eons, they evolved to have a singular purpose for the stinger. That's how they inflict damage if something is threatening them. Because it started as a way for laying eggs, that means that only female bees have stingers. And that's one of my favorite bee facts. Males don't have stingers, which means male bees can't sting. I like to keep this book around at hand in spring and summer. So when the insects start flitting from flower to flower and I see something new and I think it's a bee, I can pick this up and remind myself what I should be looking for. And every now and then identify something new in my garden. This book is filled with information about bees that you've probably never even heard of. Have you heard of a sweat bee? They like human sweat. So the sweat bees will land on skin just to lick up the sweat. And how about cuckoo bees, like cuckoo birds? The cuckoo bee female will lay eggs in another bee's nest to take advantage of all the food that the other bee has stored, and sometimes after hatching to eat the other bee's larva. I love this book, and if you have any interest in bees, you should probably add it to your library because the information goes on and on and on. There you have it, one of the best gardening books, The Bees in Your Backyard. If you have any comments or questions or wish to subscribe, you can do so below. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.